Ritual monsters are monsters that require a ritual spell and attribute of monsters of equal or more total levels as the ritual monsters to be summoned, and these requirements make ritual summoning one of the most inefficient summoning mechanics in the game, and has led to a long history of ritual monsters underperforming compared to other summoning types. That said, throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's many years, there have been plenty of examples of powerful ritual monsters that break the mold and can overcome ritual summoning's inherent downsides. Starting us off at number 10, we have Evigishki Mind Augus. This is a level 6 water aqua monster with 2500 attack and 2000 defense that can be ritual summoned by using an Evigishki ritual spell. Its effect is that when it's ritual summoned, you may target up to 5 cards in any graveyard and shuffle them back into the deck. Now, on its own, this doesn't seem like that impressive of a monster. Its effect doesn't directly net you any advantage, nor does it impact the board significantly. But the important part of this card, which really made it quite dangerous, is that it does not have a hard once per turn on this effect. This effect, in combination with the deck filled with draw cards like Hand Destruction, the Water Theme Array of Greed, and the highly abusable Royal Magical Library, allowed for Gishki to execute an elaborate infinite loop where you would summon Evigishki Mind Augus over a dozen times. This was enabled by the effect of the deck's ritual spell, Gishki Aqua Mirror, that allowed you to shuffle back into the deck to return a Gishki ritual monster back to your hand, which was usually Mind Augus or a secondary Evigishki ritual monster like Evigishki Soul Ogre to act as a ritual summoning material. The primary goal of this deck was to win via deck out on turn 1 thanks to Mind Augus's ability to constantly recycle and reuse cards like Card Destruction, 1 Day apiece, and Hand Destruction, forcing your opponent to draw cards until they ran out of cards to draw. Mind Augus would prevent you from ever decking out and recycle these draw spells over and over, while cards like Royal Magical Library, Salvage, and Gishki Aqua Mirror would keep you at card advantage positive. This combo was powerful enough to play through the relevant hand traps of the era, like multiple copies of Effect Veiler and DD Crow, while being incredibly consistent thanks to all of the draw power. About a year after its release, Evigishki Mind Augus was limited to 1, solving the problem of looping itself with itself for the next several years. One of the oddest yet most powerful ritual monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, only had the effect to shuffle cards back into the deck from the graveyard. Next up on this list at number 9, we have Illusion of Chaos. This is a level 7 Dark Spellcaster monster with 2100 attack and 2500 defense that you can ritual summon with Chaos form. It has 2 effects. The first allows you to, once per turn, reveal Illusion of Chaos in your hand, then add 1 card that mentions Dark Magician in it from your deck to your hand, then put 1 card from your hand on top of your deck. Second, it has the effect on the field that once per turn is a quick effect. When your opponent activates a monster effect, you can return Illusion of Chaos to your hand. And if you do, special summon 1 Dark Magician from your graveyard. And if you do that, negate the effect. Illusion of Chaos is one of the oddest ritual monsters, as on a competitive level, it never really gets ritual summoned. Players instead use it as a secondary way to access the very powerful Magician Souls monster. Magician Souls has 2 incredibly powerful effects that players want to have access to outside Dark Magician decks. It can send a level 6 or higher spellcaster from the deck to the graveyard as cost to special summon itself. And even more importantly, while it's on the field, you can send up to 2 of your spell and trap cards from your hand or field to the graveyard to draw that many cards. Prior to Illusion of Chaos, you would really only see Magician Souls played in not very competitive Dark Magician decks, slightly more competitive Pendulum-based spellcaster decks, and the highly competitive Spiral decks. Though Spiral Master Plan was quickly banned after Magician Soul's release because of this interaction. Those were the decks with the main deck high-level spellcaster monsters that were happy to be put into the graveyard to facilitate it. But Illusion of Chaos completely changed that. Not only could it search out Magician Souls, but it also put itself back on top of the deck to fulfill Magician Soul's requirement to send any level 6 or higher spellcaster from your deck to the graveyard. This meant any deck could splash this super powerful starter and card draw engine, and highly competitive decks like Adventure Engine based decks and Eldritch decks had tons of spells and traps that they would love to send to the graveyard, and were tier 1 strategies, which included it. Illusion of Chaos turned Magician Souls from a niche powerful starter into a generic one any deck can access and search. While Illusion of Chaos isn't really known for its uses as a ritual monster that you can summon to the field, it's still one of the most highly impactful ritual monsters ever due to its interaction with Magician Souls with its hand effect. And coming in at number 8, we have Drytron Meteonis Draconids. This is a level 12 light machine monster with a whopping 4000 attack and defense that can be ritual summoned using Meteonis Drytron. It has a number of effects. First, your opponent cannot target with monster effects. Second, if the total level of a monster used for its ritual summons was 2 or less, it can attack all special summon monsters your opponent controls once each. Lastly, during your opponent's turn as a quick effect, you can banish monsters from your graveyard whose total attack equals exactly 2000 or 4000, then target 1 card your opponent controls for each 2000 attack and send those cards to the graveyard. Drytron Meteonis Draconids is the boss monster of the Drytron archetype, an archetype that adjusts the usual ritual summoning mechanics revolving around levels to revolve around trading monsters with equal or more attack than your ritual monster thanks to their ritual spell, Meteonis Drytron. Drytron is arguably the most powerful ritual deck of all time, due to the insane advantage of each Drytron monster being able to special summon themselves from the hand or graveyard and plus you along the way. Most notably Drytron Alpha Thuban and Drytron Zeta Aldhiba, which could search out ritual monsters and ritual spells respectively. While the deck would often focus on other boss monsters it could access through other ways on turn 1 to set up a board, Drytron Meteonis Draconids was the deck's in-archetype boss monsters meant to clean up board states and take down your opponent going second, or finish them off on turn 3 if they failed to beat you up after your turn 1 board setup. It's one of the most powerful ritual monsters ever printed with its combination of quick effect interaction, strong protection effect, absurd stats, a board clear and removal effect, all on top of being part of a high power archetype. The 12 stars would normally be a huge hindrance for a ritual monster, but Drytron's ability to circumvent this meant it only really had a home in Drytron. But since that was, and to this day is, the strongest ritual archetype, it never needed another home. Just an all-around blockbuster monster that's actually powerful enough to justify the huge investment it takes to summon it. And at number 7, we have Nekroz of Brionac. This is a level 6 warrior monster with 2300 attack that can be ritual summoned with any Nekroz ritual spell. It must be ritual summoned and can't use another copy of itself as material. It has 2 effects where each one of them can only be used once per turn. First, you can discard from your hand and add 1 Nekroz monster from your deck to your hand, except Nekroz of Brionac. Second, you can target up to 2 face-up monsters in the field that were special summoned from the extra deck and shuffle them into the deck. Nekroz of Brionac is the first card on this list of the ultra-dominant Nekroz archetype, a deck that had the notorious status of being tier 0 back in 2015, even if only for one event. Nekroz of Brionac is one piece of a larger advantage and consistency engine that Nekroz employed to combat the inherent negatives, limitations, and inconsistency issues with ritual summoning. Its in-hand effect to search any Nekroz monster, on top of being searchable by preparation of rites as a level 6 monster, meant that Nekroz functionally had 6 cards that searched out any monster in their deck. Any of the numerous powerful ritual monsters, and just as importantly, it could search out Shirit, Strategist of the Nekroz, a monster who could supplement the entire level cost of Nekroz ritual summoning by itself, and when tributed would let you add a warrior Nekroz monster, often another Nekroz of Brionac, from deck to hand, replacing itself when tributed. This hyper consistency and advantage engine meant that, even with the restrictions of ritual summoning, Nekroz had a never before seen level of consistency and card advantage compared to any deck that came before. Brionac's on-field effective bounce extra deck monsters was also very strong, as some of the best decks in the format besides Nekroz were heavily extra deck reliant, like Burning Abyss and Shaddoll. Being the core consistency card in a tier 0 deck and a powerful enough monster to ritual summon in its own right makes Nekroz of Brionac one of the best ritual monsters ever. And at number 6, we have Libromancer Doombroker. This is a level 6 Dark Fiend monster with 2500 attack that can be ritual summoned with a Libromancer card. If it's ritual summoned using a monster on the field as a tribute, it can attack directly. It has 2 once per turn effects. First, during your main phase, you can set 1 Libromancer trap directly from your deck. Second, when it inflicts battle damage to your opponent, you can target 1 face-up monster your opponent controls and shuffle it into the deck. Libromancers are the most recent ritual archetype release. They revolve around a series of powerful main deck monsters that can special summon themselves and add other Libromancer cards from your deck to your hand. Like how Libromancer Geek Boy can add a Libromancer spell, or Libromancer Fire can add a Libromancer monster. This is fairly similar to how Drytron functions, searching for cards and gaining advantage before committing to the inherent negative card advantage of a powerful ritual summon. Libromancer Doombroker is the archetype's most used and most powerful ritual boss monster. Its effect to search and set any Libromancer trap means you have consistent access to Libromancer Intervention, a trap that lets you negate any card effects so long as you bounce a Libromancer back to your hand, and then it will special summon a Libromancer from your hand or graveyard, usually triggering one of the regular monsters that will immediately plus you on cards and sets up your next ritual play. Coming with a free back row Omni Negate is incredibly powerful for a highly efficient ritual deck like Libromancer, as it bypasses the weaknesses a lot of ritual decks have against cards like Forbidden Droplets or Dark Ruler No More, which can very easily undo a very costly committed to ritual monster. And its on-field effect to shuffle any monster upon dealing damage while being able to attack directly gives the deck a highly keyable out to nearly any monster on top of that. Despite the high-power metagame of 2022, Libromancer has seen a decent bit of success as a rogue strategy in tournaments, which says a lot for just how good Doombroker and Libromancer archetype is as a competitive ritual deck. And at number 5 on this list, we have Nekroz of Trishula. This is a level 9 water warrior ritual monster with 2700 attack that can be summoned with any Nekroz ritual spell. It must be ritual summoned and can't use any level 9 monsters as material. It has 2 once per turn effects. First, when a card or effect is activated that targets a Nekroz monster you control, you can discard Nekroz of Trishula as a quick effect to negate the activation. Second, when ritual summoned, you can banish exactly 3 of your opponent's cards, 1 each from their hand, field, and graveyard, with the card in hand chosen at random. As mentioned with Nekroz of Brionac, Nekroz of Trishula was a core part of the tier 0 Nekroz archetype. While Brionac was largely powerful for its hand search effect to boost consistency, Trishula was the deck's most heavy impact boss monster to actually summon to the field, while also having an incredibly powerful in-hand effect as well. Nekroz really set the table for the idea of an archetypal cards having hand trap style effects, and Trishula's ability to negate any effect that targets a Nekroz monster was insanely powerful, especially with Nekroz's inherently recursive engine mitigating the cost of the discard. Its on-field effect was equally devastating, as banishing 3 cards in summon has been a busted play going back to its namesake Trishula Dragon of the Ice Barrier. Though unlike the original Trishula, Nekroz of Trishula required a card in every zone to successfully activate, meaning it was less used to rip cards from your hand on turn 1 like the original Trishula, but more often a card that devastated your opponent on turns 2 and later. Ostensibly, the biggest downside of Nekroz of Trishula is its 9-star cost as a ritual monster. But with the powerful ritual spells like Nekroz Mirror, which could banish cards into the graveyard as tribute, Nekroz Kaleidoscope, which could send monsters from the extra deck for cost, or the aforementioned Shirit Strategist of the Nekroz, who could supplement the entire ritual requirement, the cost was usually fairly trivial. Nekroz of Trishula's status as the finisher for Nekroz makes it one of the most important and powerful ritual monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. And at number 4 on this list, we have Megalith Phul. This is a level 2 Earth Rock monster with 500 attack and 2000 defense that can be ritual summoned with any Megalith card. It has 2 once per turn effects. If it's ritual summoned, you can target 1 ritual monster in your graveyard, and Phul's level becomes a level of that target, and you can add that target to your hand. During the main phase, as a quick effect, you can ritual summon 1 Megalith ritual monster from your hand or deck by tributing monsters from your hand or field, whose levels equal or exceed the ritual monster's level. The Megaliths are a very distinct ritual archetype, as all of the Megalith monsters act as the ritual spells, and often as the ritual materials for each other. The deck has access to powerful cards like Megalith Drytron and Omni-Negate on any effect that targets a card you control, or Megalith Bethor, which can destroy as many cards your opponent controls up to a number of different ritual monsters in your graveyard. These effects are very powerful, and the lack of running potentially bricky ritual spells, since the monster's substitute for the ritual spells, is a strong way to bypass one of the inherent weaknesses of ritual summoning. But Megalith Phul takes this concept to an entirely different level. Phul breaks ritual summoning in 3 separate ways. First, it cheats its own level and adds materials back to the hand, meaning it single-handedly can fulfill all of the requirements of a ritual summon. Second, it can ritual summon as a quick effect, allowing cards like Megalith Bethor to use its powerful board wiping effect as an interaction on your opponent's turn, rather than a later turn board breaker. Finally, and most importantly, it can ritual summon a monster from the deck, an inherent plus compared to having to have the card in your hand, as well as a huge consistency boost in never needing to draw or search out the Megalith monster you want to access. Megalith Phul is one of the most powerful ritual monsters ever, purely because of how it ignores or overcomes every single weakness ritual archetypes have. The only thing stopping Megalith Phul from being the most powerful ritual monster ever isn't really its own effects, but rather the other Megalith cards it has access to. The other Megaliths, while solid, aren't really high power enough to take advantage of just how powerful Phul is. The ceiling the archetype has as a standalone strategy means it spent most of its time as a rogue strategy, though it was powerful enough to be included in many Drytron lists as a secondary archetype and see tier 1 level of play. Phul's power level and ability to bypass most of the pitfalls of ritual summoning makes it by far the best Megalith card, and one of the best ritual monsters. And at number 3, we have yet another Nekroz monster, Nekroz of Unicore. This is a level 4 water spellcaster monster with 2300 attack and 1000 defense that can be ritual summoned with any of your Nekroz ritual spell, and must be ritual summoned. Like the previously mentioned Nekroz ritual monsters on this list, it has 2 effects. First, you can discard it to target 1 Nekroz card in your graveyard, except Nekroz of Unicore, and add that card to your hand on a once per turn. Second, it negates the effects of face-up monsters in the field that were special summoned from the extra deck. Nekroz of Unicore is obviously a very powerful monster. The Floodgate style effect to negate extra deck monsters on its own is fairly powerful, even back in 2015, as most decks operated out of the extra deck even back then. And its effect to recur any Nekroz card in the graveyard meant it could substitute as any of the previously used boss monsters like Nekroz of Trishula, recycle Shirit the Strategist and Nekroz to supplement another ritual summon, or even return a needed Nekroz ritual spell to perform another summon. These effects are great, but oddly enough, neither of them are the most broken thing about Unicore. Unicore's most powerful function in Nekroz is that it was a 4-star ritual monster. Not only was the cost incredibly cheap, but it allowed Nekroz players to use Nekroz Kaleidoscope to send Herald of the Arc Light from the extra deck to the graveyard to fulfill the cost of summoning the card. That meant you could immediately add any ritual spell or monster for the cost of summoning Unicore, a powerful on-field monster in its own right. If that wasn't enough, being level 4 allowed Nekroz to very easily access rank 4 strategies. Most infamously, it let Nekroz summon the truly busted Lavalval Chain, a generic rank 4 that can send any card from the deck to the graveyard. Nekroz would abuse this to send Jin release her rituals to the graveyard, whose effect led to be used in the graveyard as ritual material, and set up a lingering Floodgate style effect that couldn't be negated to lock your opponent out of special summoning entirely. This was a big part of why Nekroz was so dominant, and Unicore's status as a versatile recursion card, a powerful on-field boss monster, and a level 4 monster enabled all of this. The highest impact ritual monster in the most competitive, dominant, if not most powerful, ritual deck of all time. Taking the penultimate spot on this list, we have Herald of Ultimateness. It is a level 12 light fairy monster with 2000 attack and 3000 defense that can be ritual summoned with Oracle of the Herald. It must be ritual summoned. Its effect is, when your opponent would special summon a monster, or activates a spell, trap, or monster effect, you can send one fairy from your hand to the graveyard to negate that special summon or activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Herald of Ultimateness is a house of a boss monster. It has no once per turn or even once per chain condition on its negation effect, meaning it can negate as many times as you have fairy monsters in your hand. The biggest limitation of Herald of Ultimateness in its native Herald archetype is that it's a 12-star monster, making it significantly harder to summon than the similarly powerful Herald of Perfection. Why expend double the tribute material for functionally a similar effect? But that's not a problem in the strongest ritual deck ever, Drytron. As mentioned earlier, Drytron uses its ritual spell card, Meteonis Drytron, to ritual summon monsters by tributing based on attack, and Herald of Ultimateness has a perfect stat line of 2000 attack. This means you can tribute a single Drytron monster, all of which have at least 2000 attack, and summon Herald of Ultimateness for a minimal investment. Herald of Ultimateness's power level is meant to be balanced out by its incredible high level and high investment to summon. But Drytron just kind of bypasses all of that. Drytron also has a fairly consistent access to Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal, which can send any card from the deck to the graveyard as a quick effect. This would allow Drytron to send a copy of Eva to the graveyard on the first turn, and then again at the start of your opponent's turn. Each Eva activation would add 2 fairies from the deck to the hand and provide fuel for Herald of Ultimateness. Setting up a board with a minimum of 4 Omni Negates with this sequence of plays is to this day an incredibly impressive board. Though calling it an Omni Negate is underselling it, as the Herald of Ultimateness' ability to negate special summons puts it a step above your typical Omni Negate. Herald of Ultimateness is the be-all, end-all of ritual boss monsters. Despite its age being released back in 2014 before even Nekroz existed, its existence as a Drytron accessible boss monster raised the bar for modern board building strategy of putting up more negates than your opponent had cards in hand. It was an absolutely oppressive effect, easily earning its second spot on this list. But none of that would have even been possible if not for the first card on this list. And finally, at number 1 on this list, we have Cyber Angel Benten. This is a level 6 light fairy monster with 1800 attack and 1500 defense. It can be ritual summoned with Machine Angel Ritual. Benten has 2 effects. The first, less relevant effect, is if it destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you inflict damage to your opponent equal to the monster's original defense. Now, the more impressive effect is that if it's tributed, you can add 1 light fairy monster from your deck to your hand. Cyber Angel Benten is not some game-winning boss monster like Herald of Ultimateness, or an archetype-defining enabler like Megalith Phul. It is instead a completely generic and hyper-effective resource engine for any ritual deck, especially Drytron. All the Drytron monsters contribute ritual monsters from the field or hand to summon themselves, which would trigger Benten's effect. One of the interesting things about Benten is that, unlike the vast majority of modern monsters, Benten does not have a clause that prevents you from searching another copy of Benten, thanks to the fact that Benten is itself a light fairy monster. So you can tribute Benten and search Benten. Another clause it lacks is a once per turn on the effect, so you can conduct your ritual summon to tribute Benten and then search Benten again. This style of continuous resource loop would be impressive in its own right, and would help deal with most ritual decks' need for material, but that isn't even everything. Most of the best generic support for ritual monsters comes in the form of light fairy monsters that Benten can search. Cards like Senju of the 1000 Hands and Manju of the 10,000 Hands were the standard normal summons in ritual decks for as long as they have existed due to their ability to search any ritual monster, or also any ritual spell in Manju's case. Even better, Benten can search Diviner of the Herald, who has a slew of synergies with ritual monsters thanks to its ability to send Herald of the Arc-Light from the extra deck to the graveyard, thus adding any ritual monster or spell to the hand like Manju, on top of raising its level to 6 and being a tuner. This means any ritual archetype can, and usually does, benefit from the inclusion of Benten, just as a powerful resource generation tool and searcher for your best searchers. It even searches the strongest ritual boss monster of this list, Herald of Ultimateness. But wait, there's more. Drytron, as you might expect, takes advantage of Benten even more. While it benefits in all of these ways like any ritual deck might, Benten is also a level 6 monster. This means Drytron would frequently ritual summon Benten instead of just using it as a tribute fodder, as she made for a perfect Xyz material to summon the previously mentioned Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal. This let Drytron set up Herald of Ultimateness, or enact any number of other degenerate strategies that a generic Foolish Burial style effect can enable. The fact that Benten also searched Diviner of the Herald, which itself can become a level 6 to be the other half of Beatrice's Xyz materials, was a match made in heaven for these angels. On top of all of this, Benten itself benefited from the immensely generic ritual search pool. The fact that all of these fair ritual searchers could also search Benten meant that this light fairy ritual core had a consistency loop that even Nekroz would be envious of. It could even be generically searched by pre-preparation of rites if all of these monsters that searched it weren't enough. Ritual monsters have always been hamstrung by their immense cost and the inconsistencies of needing to draw a ritual spell and a monster in the hand. The powerful searching capabilities of ritual decks in tandem with Cyber Angel Benten's never-ending loop of card advantage and beneficial typing makes it the best solution to the problem, allowing ritual decks to actually compete and thrive. It might not be a ritual boss monster, but it's certainly ritual's best monster, and that lets it take the #1 spot on this list.
It's almost time for dinner. What do you want to eat?
I want to watch this video with the differences between Yu-Gi-Oh! And Magic the Gathering by the ManaLogs of the YouTube channel TheDuelLogs ManaLogs.
Okay, that's nice. We can watch that while we eat. Do you want macaroni or mashed potatoes as a side?
Wow, did you know due to the difference in resource mechanics, Magic has a hand trap that requires you to discard 1 card from your hand to negate in a similar manner to Ash Blossom, and it's so strong it's banned in multiple formats?
Didn't the therapist tell you to stop ignoring me and talking about TheDuelLogs all channels?
Man, it's crazy how MTG doesn't have a concept to negate boss monsters like Barone. The system of the game just doesn't really support building up a strong board of monsters.